So inshallah, we wanted to pause on Surah Al-Fatiha, and we wanted to take an approach which is called Tafsir al-Tahlili, which is a little more analytical, in the approach that we're taking. So versus just giving a general breakdown, Surah Al-Fatiha, we wanted to go into some details. And so the first thing that we're going to do before going back to Tafsir al-Qurtubi is just look at the English translation of Al-Jalalain and see it's not that long. It's not that long, but there's a lot of benefit to it. And then we'll see where the benefit lies when we look at Tafsir al-Qurtubi. In basic translation, is beginning with the Basmala. And the ulama, they debate about whether the Basmala is part of Surah Al-Fatiha or not. In any event, and the madhab of Imam Nu'man bin Thabit, which is Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullahi alayhi, is still, in order for the Quran to be recited, it has to be, the Basmala has to be included in order for the completion of the Quran to take place. For the Shafi'i school, they consider it to be part of it. And then the Malikis, they go in between. And part of the issue is because of the narrations of the ahadith and the way that the ahadith indicate. It's very hard to determine which practice overrides what practice. So usually you find within the madhab, they will take one over the other. But both of them are there, reciting the Basmala and not reciting the Basmala, especially when we start talking about the issue of the Salah. Both madhabs are there. It doesn't really matter what you practice in that regard. Both, are there. Reciting out loud or not reciting out loud. You can't say one is dominant over the other. There's no way to do it. That's why you find the ulama are at a gridlock with that. But in any event, you find that the majority will say that it's part of Al-Fatiha. Is without a debate that Surah At-Tawbah is not, does not include the Basmala before it. Now the reason why the ulama, they debate about that. Some of them say because Surah At-Tawbah and Surah Al-Anfal are one. Kind of like two surahs in one. Others say because the Basmala is removed from Surah At-Tawbah, but is included in the beginning of every other surah because of the contents of Surah At-Tawbah. And that is to eliminate the whole idea of the compassion and mercy on those who disbelieve in Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and those who go against the command. So the meaning becomes one in which you approach this surah, and the first thing that you encounter is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala disassociates any relationship between himself and the unbelievers in that regard. And then, some of the mufassirin or the scholars of tafsir or those who focus on the meanings of the tafsir, they make that note. Here, the first thing that we encounter, and in our study of the Quran, it has been a study of the Quran that has been kind of just trying to understand the environment. What is the impact of these ayat on that community? That first community which encountered the Quran. So now we encounter the first surah that's revealed and complete. Prior to that, we were just looking at ayat. We just saw ayat from not a couple in exactitude, but about 3 surah of the Quran. And so Surah Al-Fatiha comes and now is revealed and complete. And the first thing that you encounter is, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That in the name of Allah, the compassionate, the merciful. That's the first thing that you encounter. That was not the first thing that we encountered before. When we look at Surah Al-Alaq, we're not really encountering it in the same way. That we encountering it, but it's not. It's in an environment of fear, in an environment in which is not, things are not settled. And that's the same thing when we look at the other surah of the Quran, whether it's Mudathir, or whether it's Muzammil, or whether it is Surah Al-Qalam. But here, now you begin to see, by this time in the revelation, the Prophet ﷺ went through some time in becoming accustomed to the fact that the Quran is being revealed. And so that's the first thing that comes. So then the second thing is the issue of Al-Hamd. So I personally, when it comes to the issue of translation, there's a lot of debate, when it comes to these issues of how to properly translate. And we never translated the Quran until after the Muslims became politically weak. Like Sheikh Al-Azhar, Muhammad Hussein Khidr, and I mentioned that before. He said that, prior to the Muslims becoming politically weak, people came and learned the Arabic language, and they learned directly how to relate to the Quran. Then after the Muslims became weak, we started to translate the Quran because we didn't have any power over the educational institutions. We didn't have any power over how we presented the deen to people. And so, at least in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the Quran was translated into Persian by Shah Wali Allah rahmatullahi alayh. And then, after that, you get what you get. So now we have a tafsir like this is translated into English. The reason why I say that is because we should not stay stuck. The word praise is complicated. It's not an equivalent to the word hamd, al-hamd. And we mentioned that before. It's not an equivalent to the word al-hamd. And I've paused on this, and I've looked at this from different ways. And actually it should be all glorification. The word all. All glorification belongs to Allah, or is the right of Allah. And that way we come closer to where the Arabic is at. Because glorification, it includes within it as a word praise and thanks. Praise and thanks. And so that's what we need to distinguish, because the issue of praise belongs to Allah. But we mentioned, like, I can, praise you. You did a good job. You know what I'm saying? But that's not going to be like when we say alhamdulillah, alhamd. We're not going to say alhamd this for you. Oh, I can say thank you. And we talked about that, and I asked the word shukriya in Urdu is like thanks. So that is included, shukr is included in the meaning, but shukr is related to receiving something. So alhamd, we mentioned that Dr. Fadl al-Samarrai, who's one of the masters of the Arabic language, I believe he's still living actually, from the ulama of Iraq. The ulama of Iraq are amazing scholars, even to this day. Even to this day, they're amazing scholars. And a lot of times we don't hear about them because you have the whole Sunni Shia thing. But the ulama of Iraq, they're amazing. I remember that Dr. Taha Jabir, rahmatullahi alayhi, was one of my teachers. He's from Iraq. He passed away. And one of the things he said is that the Sunnis and the Shia, they used to compete with each other. So you had the ulama from the Shia and the ulama from the Sunnah. And they used to memorize the poetry. Like there's this book that some of the scholars even study called Nahj al-Balagha, which is big amongst the Shia. But the Arabic is very high. And so sometimes you find that they would study it. The Sunnis would study it. It was even taught at Al-Azhar. And so then the Sunnis would study their own poetry. Right? And so it became known that those people were historically masters of fiqh, masters of the Arabic language. This is the place where people like Imam al-Ghazali, Imam Abu Hanifa, all of these scholars came from that region. Right? And it was a place where Arabic and Persian was always mixed. And so Dr. Fadl Samarrai, he mentions, in analyzing this from an Arabic language perspective, that when we say alhamd, one of the secrets of the usage of the word alhamd is that it belongs to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala as a right. It's the right of Allah to receive alhamd prior to the creation. We mentioned that before. Prior to anything being created, alhamd belongs as the right to Allah, and after the creation, right? Whereas when we start using words like, athana, which would be closer to praise, or shukr and all of that, now those have relationships in the created world. You get the point? It's a very subtle point.
In this praise word, the servitude is not there. When we say Alhamdulillah, we have in mind that He is the Lord of all the world. It's not like, okay, thank you. The servitude is not there.
Yes, and that's a beautiful point. And that's why this is why we paused on the Fatiha. Why? Because everybody, alhamdulillah, Muslims, they have a relationship. And actually I was asked to tell everybody that there was some tea. Last time we didn't drink the tea, and they made a very good tea. And the Hussein family, and they brought it to the class. I think there's some tea and some other stuff. Last time we didn't drink it, and it stayed there. So please, brothers, don't leave it there, because that's from the karam of the people, to give them reward for their household and stuff. But you're right about that, and that's the thing. That's why we pause on this, because the Muslims, alhamdulillah, people have studied the Fatiha, this and that, but to go back and reflect, even in our lives, it makes us pause so that in our salah. That's why I want to focus on this, so that this corrects us in our salah, because a lot of times in the salah it's so fast. We go through it so fast. Some people didn't notice the imam. If they did, he was reciting in another qira'ah. You know what I'm saying? So the Quran has multiple dimensions, but you're right. That brings us to the point of our relationship with Allah. Who is Allah and who are we? And in order for the Quran to have some sort of impact on us, we have to pause a little bit. Like now this is, I don't want to get into the grammar stuff so much, right? But here it says that the content of the meaning here of alhamd is intended to extol Allah. See, now that comes back to the issue of glorification. Praising, it doesn't give you that dynamic meaning. Hey, Umair, assalamu alaikum. So that's important. That's an important point that you mentioned. That, okay, how do we look at ourselves and our identity? And how do we look at our relationship with Allah? Like you said, there's a servitude side. It's unfortunate, but there's some things that we have to come to terms with. Okay? Some of the scholars, they say there's two areas. I don't want to go too far because I want to focus on it, but I want to mention this. Some of them say that there's two areas that a lot of times we can find that our iman is undermined. Shubuhat, shahwat. The shubuhat comes to the issue of doubts. It becomes the intellectual point. If you didn't understand something properly, it sticks with you, it grows. And then if you don't have the right understanding of a thing, say for instance, if you say something to me and I interpret it the wrong way, the word, you maybe send a praise and I interpret it as a curse. And then I myself are not controlled in myself. What are you doing? You know what I'm saying? And then you're like, hold on a second. And then I maybe throw something at you. And then it becomes a fitna, right? So that becomes from where? Where did that start from? From how I understood. And how I understood it has an impact on how I'm going to react with my emotions. So that's sometimes the impact of shubuhat, doubts, shubha in the singular sense. So that happens sometimes if we don't have an understanding of who God is. Right? Or even the issue of alhamd, like you're saying, servitude. This from the beginning, Al-Fatiha is teaching us that all ibadah is for Allah. Only Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala deserves to be extolled, glorified, upheld, considered to be holy and perfect, has the right to worship. So if I'm not clear on that, then it's possible that I'll give my worship to other things. And this is actually a dialogue that I have going on with some brothers. What is the point where addiction to something becomes like possession? What's the difference between the two? If someone is possessed, how do they act? I mean, it's a question. How do they act?
Possessed means like
Possessed meaning, like for instance, that they're taken over by a jinn or the shayateen. How do they act? Are they in control of themselves? And that's how the addiction becomes too, right? The difference between the addiction you find is that thing which they're addicted to is very clear that they're addicted to that thing. It could be anything, but you find they're addicted to that thing and they do everything for that thing, which it sounds like ibadah. It sounds like they become enslaved to that thing, right? And so for us, in this regard, that type of servitude, is it destructive to us? Like servitude to Allah wa ta'ala in this case. If we're submitted to Allah, where it's like everything that we do is for Allah, for the praise of Allah wa ta'ala, and the seeking of Allah's pleasure, does that do damage to us? Now, for instance, if you're addicted to shopping, and everything you do is for shopping, does that do damage to you? In what way? What about eating? You're addicted to eating. I hate to say that, but you're addicted to sex. You're addicted to praise. Like people have to praise you. See what I'm saying? So that sense of servitude, here, this is a negation that anything in the dunya, this is what frees us. This is where the liberation comes from. That type of servitude that you're talking about, right? Where you extol somebody, where you extol here, the word extol is to basically is to hold them in such high regard, right? That only belongs to Allah, right? Allah possesses that from all creatures, right? From all of the creation. Or that Allah alone deserves that praise or their praise. Nothing else. But here, like we said, we're keeping in mind when they use the word hamd, they use the word praise that we substituted for hamd. So that negates that anything has that quality, right? And then here he says that the word Allah is a proper noun for the one truly worthy of worship. The word Lord is also problematic. It's terrible. It's terrible. You know, that we are at this level where we're not focusing. Right? This is something, it should not be translated. Rabb should not be translated. Because Rabb contains all of the sifat of Allah wa ta'ala, just like Allah. Right? The word Allah is not translatable. The word Rabb is not translatable. Now here when we talk about Alameen, we mentioned that before, it comes back up again in Tafsir al-Qurtubi. And this is the point that Dr. Fadl Samarai, as a scholar of the Arabic language, he chose that one of the meanings that's used in Tafsir. But he says that, you know, this does not apply to worlds. Some of the scholars says it applied to worlds. And then they said worlds is everything that's created. So that's one approach to Tafsir. That's beautiful. If you're a person that is focusing on, for instance, if you focus, like the other day I was watching this video about ants, you know, the ants. And it's amazing, like like what they do. You know, they have these cameras, they study the ants. So that's like a world in itself. You know what I'm saying? It's a world in itself. If you, for instance, if you're a person that, you know, sometimes so one of my children came home and was like talking about the stars and planets. So and then, you know, now they have these telescopes where, you know, the ant thing is almost like at a microscopic level. Even if you study biology and, you know, you see the beautiful thing. If you, the beautiful things that manifest themselves in that world. With a telescope, you see things that are out there beyond the range of the eye. So when you really think about that, Rabbul Alameen, like it brings you to a reflection. But what kind of reflection? Like if you have that sense that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala is Rabbul Alameen, and you interpret it Alameen, you understand it not with your own meaning, but with the Arabic language to mean all of the worlds, what kind of feeling comes into your heart? What feeling comes in?
He's the master of the universe. He owns everything. Everything that exists belongs to Allah.
Okay, when you think about the worlds, everything that's out there, isn't it sometimes amazing?
It kind of, whatever we understood and read before that kind of justifies.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's true. It upholds this. It upholds when we say all glorification, alhamdulillah, right? When we come to this point, Rabbul Alameen, it supports why are we giving Allah this glorification. It's describing who Allah is. Remember, in Surah Al-Alaq, we're taught that Allah is the one that creates. And so now we're taught that all of the creation, Allah is the Rabb over it. Rabb, some of them, there's two schools of thought in tafsir. One school of thought in tafsir says that there's synonyms in the Quran, and another school of thought says there's no synonyms in the Quran. I'm personally with the school of thought that says that there's no synonyms in the Quran. Meaning that every time you look at a word, you have to focus to see what is it that Allah is communicating, right? So some say Rabb, it means Malik, like the one that has control and power over everything. But really the word Rabb, it has its own meaning, and we mentioned that before. All right, the Rabb is also the one that maintains and takes care of it, right? Not just the master, the owner, but the one that takes care of it. So when you think about the world, when you think about the universe, when you think about everything that's possible to think about in the creation, okay, in your daily life, do you ever get stressed? You get stressed from maintaining what you have to do in the day, right? So imagine, okay, for instance, you ever seen sometimes like you ever seen like Black Fridays? Black Fridays at the stores, how crazy they get. They have to try to control that, and it gets out of hand. You ever see like Chipotle? You drive by Chipotle, you see these long lines. You know, Chipotle had to come up with a new management system. Same thing with Starbucks, same thing with McDonald's, because these places, they have to control all this. That concept never comes into play. Everything in the universe, it flows. There's no contradiction. There's nothing, it gets out of order and out of control, and, everything is in its proper place. The system of the ocean doesn't contradict the system of the land. And even if there's like, for instance, like a hurricane or whatever, and it destroys everything, when things start to come back after the hurricane, you see that sometimes it comes back even stronger than what it was. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's a process which is like, there's no, what we call in Arabic, tanaqudat. There's no contradictions at all. So it gives us the world in itself, and our reflecting upon the world, everything that is involved with that. It gives us this understanding of who Allah is, how powerful Allah is. Is it possible, there's not only an issue of power, it's also the issue of knowledge and perfection and everything that comes along with that. That's one tafsir, that this means worlds. The other tafsir is that that's pertaining to the jinn and is pertaining to the ins. We mentioned that last time. So that Allah is the Rabbul Alameen, that Allah is the Rabb of those who have the free will, free choice. That they just don't operate independently, right? Not only that, also, if for instance, if you say the farmer plants seeds. Does the farmer just plant seeds and just leave the seeds? Or the shepherd? The shepherd, what does the shepherd do? What does the shepherd do? Huh?
The word in Urdu is palan hat. It's taking, it encircles whatever he needs to take care of it. He's a sustainer. It's just not like one thing. He's totally taking care of it.
Okay, so how do you think, what's the feeling that you get from that?
You are his slave.
But if you're being taken care of, what kind of feeling does that give you? Yeah, like what comes from the feeling of protection though? Sense of what? Yes. Yes. So when you start talking about the issue of, okay, we acknowledge that Allah wa ta'ala is one, right? We acknowledge that Allah is the only one to be worshipped. So when it comes to the issue of tawakkul or depending, okay, you know those tests that they have? Have you ever seen those tests that they have where it's a confidence test? Where you have your eyes closed and somebody's behind you and you're supposed to fall back. You ever seen that? And, there's something that develops in you. Like, can I really trust this person? If I fall back, are they going to catch me? Or I'm just going to fall back and just get hurt? So Allah wa ta'ala gives us, the Quran gives us in His indications, is teaching us, okay, when we have tawakkul, why should we have tawakkul? This can be interpreted in two ways. One, that is teaching us about the universe in itself, or the other tafsir is that Allah is our Rabb, but why should we trust Allah? Right? Why should we fall back and have the confidence in Allah? Na'tamad alayh. Yani, and another word to say is, one thing that comes out of that is إياك نعبد إياك نستعين. الاستعانة, right? So now we're depending upon Allah. Like a person is walking with a cane. Why are they walking with that cane? Take that cane away from that person that needs it. What happens? Yes. So we're relying upon Allah in that way. So that's another way to look at it. That the Alameen is talking about us. Forget about the jinn. It's talking about us. That Allah is our Rabb in this universe. One of the things about kufr is that kufr will have you believe that in this big universe that you don't have meaning. Iman teaches you that in this big universe that you have meaning. That in this universe, planets, suns, we don't know the extent of what the reality is. That you have meaning, right? It's a different concept. That you make dua and has impact. And the thing about it is that there's some science to that. You ever heard people that say, well, they look back, something happens. Well, I made dua 2 years ago to have this. A brother was telling me that yesterday. He was like, or actually today, he was telling me, I made dua a few years ago to feel a certain way. And I guess, and I'm feeling that way now. I guess this was an answer to the dua. I made dua for a wife like this. And this is the type of family that I have. Some people will say, well, that's so, but they say, not so scientific. But from the people of Iman, there is a science to that. The people that believe in Allah, they have security in the teachings of the deen. They see in their lives that come about. Right? They see in their lives that come about. Sometimes we forget. That's the issue of dhikr. Right? The issue of dhikr is a reminder. And the Quran is that. It teaches, is a reminder of those things. Sometimes we forget. But here, one is using the term Maliki, right, to talk about that Allah is the one who here should be also has dominion. Dominion. Power over, dominion. Right? That's why the word king sometimes they use it. But you see, like for instance in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, that in Qurtubi, in a lot of ways, there's some narrations that we have that who is the real king. In other words, like negating that idea for any human to show that that concept can apply to any human being, because in reality, on the day of judgment, meaning when human beings die, when the other process begins, the encounter with another dimension of life, then it shows what the reality is. So sometimes when we use the word king, we're going backward. We're trying to understand Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala on human terms, right? Versus understanding what it is that the Quran wants us to understand. So here is the one that really has dominion, power, control, over the humans, the jinns, the angels, animals, everything else. So here, Imam in Tafsir Jalalain, they went with the idea of the worlds. So each of which may be referred to as a world. All of these things. Right. So that's one way. He took that concept that Alameen, it means worlds. Then here, this is something that's beautiful. To want what is good for those who deserve it. This is the issue sometimes that I have with the way we talk about Qadr. Qadr exists, no doubt. But maybe the way that we talk about Qadr is not the right way. Sometimes we create a crisis of faith for people because we act like Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala wants evil for us. So evil may happen. Sure, tragedies happen. But sometimes you see, sometimes we go to extremes, like these big tragedies, especially these tragedies that are happening. That actually we haven't seen these types of things when we look at human history as a whole. Things have happened, but the level of murder and killing that happens now, we haven't seen that in history of human beings. Like there's whole countries just wiped out. The numbers before may have happened, but it's not like you see back to back. We're seeing this stuff happen. So sometimes people say, "Oh, that's the qadr of Allah," right? And so, verse is saying, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun." This is a fitna, right? And so it gives the meaning sometimes that, Allah wanted that for them. And it's not a good, Allah created everything, but Allah is not pleased with everything, right? So it doesn't give hope. It doesn't give hope in using the qadr in that way. So there's such a thing as adab with Allah. From the adab is not to attribute evil to Allah, although Allah created the evil. Right? Fadl.
Just like I heard from one of the lecturers of scholars, just like we have science rules, regulations, and same with there are social rules that we don't see it.
Yes.
Just like they say, what goes around comes around.
Yes.
And all that.
Yes.
There are rules in the, like kids that are born out of wedlock.
Yes.
If you see the news, that those are the ones that creating a lot of the things that we hear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
The sunan.
these things are not coming out of vacuum. The things that we do today, that's the fruit that we get.
And the things that we don't do as well. Like not enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. right? There's things also that we don't do that it leads to result. Yeah, there's a sunan. There's the sunan of the universe that govern the universe, rules that govern the universe, and there's the sunan of the sharia, how the sharia operates. But the point that we want to get from this is that the Quran is telling us, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, who is Allah? What do we make out of that? One of the takeaway points from Tafsir al-Jalalain is that Allah wants good for those who deserve it. So we should fall back on that, and we should be quiet about who deserves something or doesn't deserve something. But one thing that we know for sure is that being pious and righteous and all of that type of thing, but not being involved in the society and encouraging what's good, that brings dilemma on the people. It doesn't matter who. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can be taken up if we consider ourselves as righteous and we're not involved and we don't contribute to the good of the society and teach and stuff like that, and uphold ourselves and make tawbah and all of that, it could, the bad can take us as well. But the point here is that we want to have that positive, good, clean, pure understanding of who Allah is. That's the point of saying that here. To want what is good for those who deserve it. Right? That's Ar-Rahim. Right? So that's important too, to look at that. Some of the scholars say that Ar-Rahman, it means to have rahmah for everything. And Ar-Rahim means that that's solely for the believers, for those who believe. That's one tafsir. So here he goes to Maliki Yawmiddin. And so this is now this we talked about the issue a little bit, whether we say Malik, or Malik, Maliki or Malik, that it has a little bit of two different meanings. We want to get away from the issue of just saying king and this and that. But here they transliterated it, and this is like the long alif, right? As opposed to the short alif. So if you say it in that way, Malik, then this signifies that Allah has possession over the entire thing, the entire affair. And in this case, on the day of resurrection. Right. That only Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has that station and that position. Right. And really here it should be al-mulk or dominion versus kingdom. That's why we've been pausing on that, because we want to remove ourselves from just, these types of words that may take away from proper meaning. It's used in the translations and so on and so forth, but it doesn't give us the full meaning, right? It doesn't give us the full meaning. And on that day, nobody, no matter what their position has power. That's the reality. It's wiped out. The day of judgment, nobody has any sort of power. And the dunya may look this way and that way, but on that day, you know what I'm saying, our understanding is wiped out. It's a different order. The truth comes to be that we all have to stand before Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and it's a day which account is taken. Right? There's no hiding. There's no buying your way out of it. There's no way of fighting or killing your way out of it. There's nothing you can do. You're helpless. Right? And that is the sense that we want to get. Imam al-Nawawi rahmatullahi alayhi, he has a book on basically, the adab that we should have in listening to the Quran. And so, for instance, on the ayat that pertain to the hereafter and so on and so forth, or Jannah or Jahannam or these type of things, like you know how you were saying that servitude, when we say Alhamdulillah, that's a certain state. So we're in this Alhamdulillah. There's a certain relationship that we should have to Allah in that regard. That's why it's important to have the meanings so we can reflect. So the same thing, that, the day of judgment, the day of standing, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, that there's a certain type of feeling that the heart should have. Right? There's a certain type of feeling that the heart should have, especially in the recitation of the Quran, which is telling us about other realities. And so in here, a little bit, it instills some fear. It's different than this. This doesn't instill fear. Right? This instills love, hope. But this instills fear.
Well, this is the goodness of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we come to this part, you say that, what did you do wrong? It's
Yes.
Because we already said that he servitude and all that. But when it comes to day of judgment, that means, it's accountability.
That's why you can lean to the opinion in the tafsir of going with that Rabbul Alameen pertains to the human beings and the jinn because they have free will. It matches with this. You see that? It matches with the idea that, okay, we come to account before Allah. Because the rest of the creation and reality is not going to be coming to account for Allah for what they did, right? So that's something. That's why some of them in that reflection, it has some weight. Another way to look at it too is like I said, everything, that we see in the creation are tools for our journey to Allah. Yes, Allah is the one that controls everything. Who Allah is, the Rabbul Alameen. Alameen means everything that's in creation. So it helps us. That's why sometimes the tafsir is not an issue of what's right or what's wrong, if the language supports it. Because it opens up different trajectories. You get what I'm saying? Or tafsir is not just the issue of, this is right or wrong always. It's the issue of is it supported in the language and in the ahadith, and is it supportable? But it makes the reflection much more rich. And then, here, this is another point that Maliki Yawmiddin, it shows us that ultimately Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the one that we have to be worried about when we do wrong and seeking forgiveness from Allah. Because we can't escape that. We can't escape that reality. And because Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the one that's the Sayyid or the master and the possessor, the one that has power, technically Allah can do whatever. Choose to punish us, no problem. But that's not, the Quran is not giving us that meaning, because the Quran initiates Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and reminds us again in the midst of all of that, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and then here, Rabbul Alameen. What does it mean? Before getting to this point, Maliki Yawmiddin. And even delays it a little bit, because this whole issue about Rabbul Alameen, it has a lot to do with our existence in the world. Our existence in the world, our feeling that there's, why was I created?
Another thing that comes to mind when we go to the mastery of the judgment, he's merciful to everybody, but whoever got not treated right in this world, then okay, so you see what I'm saying?
Yes, that there's justice that comes. And that's why, for instance, when we talk about, whether we talk about Malik or Maliki Yawmuddin, whichever one we use out of those ways, it brings us back to don't worry about it. At the end of the day, don't worry. Remember when we said that, you do the exercise, the fallback exercise. Can you trust? There's the angle of removing from you. Don't think that, this is not handled. Because in the issue of the world, of course, the world has a lot to do with time and actions and all that. It's easy to what? You say, well, this one, I was actually watching a video and I found out that the video was not recent. It was from a few months back. There were some protesters in India. May Allah make it easy for them. And they were killed in the street. And you look at that, you're like, oh my. The only thing that they did is they just raised their voices. Is that equivalent? You see what I'm saying? You sit back sometimes, you're like, how is that even equivalent? That deserves death. You know what I'm saying? So it brings you back to that point that, it brings you back to that point that in the dunya, there's so many things that you see that sometimes you're like, wow, how did that happen? How does that continue? I saw another video where they claim there's some Muslims in China, and then you just see the people, you see the looks on their faces. It's just like, distraught. And there are other situations that you see that you interact in real time, real place. But it's like you said, it brings you back to, regardless, in this event, in Surah Al-Asr, it brings that to us. That time that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, that's why Surah Al-Asr specifically makes it clear to us that Allah is the one that created time. Right? And this day of judgment, all of that culminates, comes together. That's why Surah Al-Fatiha is said to contain everything that's in the Quran. Somehow or some way it'll come back. Right? That's the reflection that comes to the. And then here, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala wa Rabbul Alameen that we find here. Again, when we say Iyaka na'budu wa Iyaka nasta'een, if we don't know who Allah is, it becomes hard. Like this issue is hard. It is hard. Even like you said, the position, what you mentioned about Alhamd, our position of servitude. Well, also when it comes to the issue of dua, we have a descriptive of dua. Dua mukh al-ibadah. That is the brain or is the core of ibadah. Why? Why would we say that?
Well, we accepted that who is our Rabb, and He is the one who can fulfill our needs and sustain us. And then at that point we make dua. Sincerity is there in the dua.
What does dua tell us about ourselves?
That we are up.
No, but what does that mean?
We seek everything from Allah. We ask for something.
Okay, there's something to that. If we have to seek, what does that say about us?
We need help.
Yes. Nahnu al-fuqara. We're the ones that are in need. We're the ones that are impoverished in that sense. It tells us fundamentally that's our nature. Our nature is not just the issue of weakness, it's the issue of needing. Allah is Samad. Allah is the one that doesn't need to depend upon anything at all, period. Huh? Yes, that's the point. If we're not self-sustaining, and that's our nature, then it's only natural, like we have to come back. Rabbul Alameen. Allah sustains us. Rabbul Alameen. Rabb. The term Rabb has that meaning. That the concept of being sustained right? Is our relationship tuned up, that Allah is the one that sustains. Here is telling us, fundamentally, our position to Allah, is one of asking and one of dependence, right? And that's coupled along with worship. It's not just an issue of just asking, so on and so forth. There's a lifestyle that comes with that. There's a lifestyle that comes with that. Like the life of worship, what does that mean? And so this really, in a lot of ways, and this is for us to reflect upon in our own, where we fall weak and all that, but, without the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is like hit or miss, how to implement this. Everyone will have his or her ideas. But when you go back and you look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala made the Prophet an uswatan hasana. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is, the best of examples, the good example, the model to be followed. Then we see what this means. We see what this means in times of hardship and deficiency. Not only that, we mentioned this before, for instance, in the tashahhud. We send salawat on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and who else? And who else?
The companion and his family. Salihin.
Yes. So even the Salihin, they teach us, like you see the stories of the Salihin. Even there's a sunnah in the dunya. And a lot of times we forget, but in the dunya is not forgotten. And that's why, for instance, the Arabs were commanded to remember Allah. And basically, with shadda, the shadda in that overwhelming way, the way that you remember your parents, your ancestors, because they were like that. The Japanese are like that as well. Ancestors. The Africans too, some of the religious ancestral worship. So the point being is that, these things, these in the dunya, for instance, when we talk about who's successful, you have their lives are studied, then the whole school of thought is made out of it. So in that case, the Salihin, they remind us. They're those examples from the past, but we learn what is our relationship with them. Yeah. They're people that came before us, but we don't worship them. We don't hold them in the same status as God. But we see them. Okay, this is how they lived their lives. Learning ibadat is just like I was saying before in the last class. Learning wudu, we can talk about the fiqh of wudu, but if you don't see it in practice, how you do it, exactly how you implement it is what? It's not clear. This was never, all you just read this, how you worship, that's it. We had, along with the Quran, we had what else? The example. The example, was it theoretical? It was practical in the lived situation. That's what we miss. Especially in these environments. Like, for instance, that's one of the things that the youth don't have. How do you live Islam in this environment? How do you implement it in these situations? Not in Mecca or Medina or back home or this or in the time period of the Sahaba. In this environment, how are you implementing? Right? That's the difficulty. That's why we said we need some, even for ourselves, we need some examples so that we can understand of how to implement. And when we start looking back at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and even the Salihin, we see how they dealt with situations. Salihin is people that are known for good deeds. People that are known to practice Islam. Right? It's kind of like, through time and observation, you see that they're consistent. here too, one of the things that's mentioned in the Jalalain is that, the issue of worship, it could be given to anything or anyone, but here, that we ourselves have committed to only give that to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Right? You alone we worship and you alone we ask for help. That is to say, we reserve worship for you alone by way of acknowledging who you are, Allah, your oneness, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask for your assistance in worship. Imam al-Shafi'i, he used to acknowledge, rahmatullahi alayhi, that praising Allah and the ability to praise Allah, both of those are blessings from Allah. You see the difference? One is the act and one is the ability to be able to even do it, right? So both of those things are there that we have to acknowledge on all those levels, right? And so the same thing with the ability for us to worship Allah and the act of worship, all of that comes from Allah. So we ask for Allah for that. Al-aun. Yeah.
Are you saying the tawfiq?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly. And some people, they focus on that. They ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala for the tawfiq. Right? Because they know that by themselves that they can't. So, we ask for your assistance in worship and in other things. Right. Here, I've seen this is a big problem. The issue of justice in marriages and all of that. Sometimes we see, not everybody, of course, but in some groups, some age ranges, some cultures, not everybody, because it's not a problem that belongs in every group. But sometimes the expectations that are placed, especially in the younger generation, upon each other, is sometimes you say, that's an expectation you only have of Allah. You see what I'm saying? And they place the expectation on a spouse when that spouse really the issue of the spouse is rights. There's an agreement. That's the difference in Islam. And it's unfortunate because here in this country, there's a big confusion. Compared to other, there's an imbalance in the world. In one environment, the contract is just a contract. We agree. You have these things in place. I do these things. We marry, and that's it. In another place, the marriage is even feeling. I feel this for you. Oh, my shoulder. I love you. The feeling. So then when the feeling goes away, oh, I don't love you anymore. Because the love is only associated with the feeling. Right? And then in the contract one, the one that's strict contract, sometimes there's no feeling. You see the imbalance? So there has to be, it's a little bit of both. And even the Prophet ﷺ, you see indications like how it wasn't just the issue of rights, but there's also an issue of how you treat each other. It's not just how you treat each other, you know what I'm saying? Emotionally, it's also, take care of each other's responsibilities. But, sometimes the expectations are, sometimes you see it and you're like, do you, sometimes you start asking, like, are you asking the person to almost worship you? You see what I'm saying? And that's something where it's like, no, that doesn't work like that. Like the person can't just every whim, every emotion that you have, just satisfy everything. Because that's only for Allah. Only Allah will satisfy perfection. But there has to be justice in the relationship. But sometimes we see that we confuse, like there's a confusion. Like some people, they have these expectations. They want every expectation, every desire fulfilled. And that's almost demanding for the person to worship you. It doesn't work like that. And we see that even in the political realm. Some of these leaders, they think that they're like Pharaoh, like, that we owe them worship. It doesn't work like that, right? So this issue of relying on Allah, is important. There's another issue where people say, I don't rely on anybody. That's not healthy. There's a reliance that's only for Allah, but there's also, can you please help me with this? Some people, when it comes to healthy relationship, they don't realize that. That's why Islam says that there's rights that people have with each other. But ultimately, there's a certain type of expecting and a certain type of reliance that it only goes back to Allah. That's why we study the deen. And when we study the deen and we study fiqh, or we get an understanding of the deen, then we understand everybody has their rights and their responsibilities. Here it's saying, okay, guide us to the straight path. Some of the ulama, they say, okay, this is made clear in the rest of the Quran. Right? When you read the rest of the Quran, like what comes after Surah Al-Baqarah and everything, now Allah starts to outline, starts to clarify what is that straight path. Right? But there's that, and we mentioned this before, like Dr. Fadl Samarai, he talked about, and the Sirat al-Mustaqim, that straight path, that the fastest route between 2 points is a straight line. So also, there's an indication here with regard to, what Islam is. And so when we study history and we look at other communities, we see deviations. Whether it's not acting upon knowledge or whether it's divinizing human beings and this and that, we see that, right? So and this comes in the path of those to whom you have favored, the ni'mah of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, an'amta alayhim. That in itself, when we say alhamdulillah, and we say that part of the issue of giving shukr to Allah and so on and so on, this is contained in that. Because a ni'mah should be followed with the shukr. Right? And so this here is telling us that Islam is a ni'mah. Right? And we're asking to stay in Islam. Right? We're asking to stay in Islam. And part of it is because it's guidance, it's huda. Right? In the Surah Al-Baqarah, that'll be more clear. But here the Quran is telling us too that just like when we talked about the issue of Yawm al-Din, that it's possible to gain the anger of Allah. It's not just compassion and mercy and forgiveness. It's possible to gain the anger of Allah. Tabaraka wa ta'ala. I had a teacher, Dr. Qazbi Zalat, and I always like to mention some of the things that he said. Like sometimes we see this, here it says, not the path of those against whom there is wrath or the anger of Allah in this. And then here it says, namely the Jews and or those who are astray, the Christians. He said, when we study the Quran, it's not for us to sit here and say, well, those people out there. When we study the Quran, is to say, do we have these qualities that the Quran is specifying about this particular group? These qualities that the Quran is talking about this specific group, is for us to see if we have those qualities or not. It's not for us to condemn this group and that group, because we know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had from this community and that community in his family. That's the reality. They came in from that community. And we still have to interact with them. So the issue is not that. The issue is the qualities that the Quran is distinguishing. Because the Quran is not only a book for Muslims. It's the Quran, if it was a book for Muslims, it wouldn't address the people of the book. The Quran addresses the people of the book and gives them guidance about what their situation is. The Quran addresses the mushrikeen, or the mushrikun, and tells them, the Quran addresses all humanity. Some of the ulama talk about that, how the khitab al-Quran how the address of the Quran is addressing so many different people that we ourselves as Muslims, we're not addressing humanity in that way ourselves. The Quran is addressing all kinds of people. It's not just addressing Muslims of a particular state. Muslims that are, mashallah, they do everything good. Is also addressing the munafiqun. Is also addressing those who are weak in iman. Is also addressing those who want to go to higher levels. That's the beauty of the Quran. So he said that the appropriate way to study the Quran is that we understand what it is that the Quran is saying, then we use it as a mirror for ourselves. Because without that, we won't be able to take any benefit from it, because what are we doing? We're always making it to be something applied outside of ourselves. And so here, he ends, with sending salawat on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right. And that's it. So we can do the Qurtubi next time, inshallah. Thursday there's not going to be a class, and we'll resume the week after, inshallah. Next Monday, yeah. Inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Please, brothers, remember that